Welcome to another LinkedIn Live discussion brought to you by Optiv, the cyber advisory and solutions leader. First of all, thank you for joining. We host these sessions on LinkedIn because we want to hear from you in real time. Don't hesitate to drop any questions or thoughts into the comments. We'll do our best to get to them during the conversation or at the end. I'm Jennifer Mahoney. I am the practice manager for the advisory side of our data governance, privacy, and protection practice here at Optiv, along with leading the AI services delivery for Optiv's practices. Here with me today is Kelsey McIsaac, a senior client manager at Optiv. This month's LinkedIn Live is in honor of Data Privacy Week. This annual event emphasizes the importance of protecting personal data and fostering trust between individuals and organizations.
Mm.
The theme for this year is taking control of your data, which is timely and critical as we navigate a cyber landscape where privacy is more complex and urgent than ever. As we jump in, we would love to hear from you.
Mhm.
Um, some of the topics you can comment on or anything that we're talking about, but in particular, we're interested to know, how do you or your organization stay in control of your data? If there's anything that is particularly useful to us or to our audience, please feel free to add your thoughts in the comments now or throughout our conversation. So, Kelsey, thank you so much for joining me today. Love to have a chance to talk to you. Um, Let me ask
For
you
having
to
me,
start.
Jennifer. Yeah,
Of
thank you.
course, of course. To kick things off here, let me ask you, what do you think about the theme for this year? Why do you think that taking control of your data is particularly relevant?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think, the theme for this year is the theme we should have every day, right? Taking control of our data. I mean, I think we can all agree that whether we're talking from as individuals or as organizations, we are sharing data at an unprecedented rate. And with that, it's like given us so many advantages. You don't have to look far to think about how much easier it is to do banking in 2025, how much easier it is to do groceries. I mean, the list goes on of positive outcomes that sharing data and using technology have afforded us. You also don't have to look very far to see how it's impacted us. And so I think about, major data breaches that we've seen in the healthcare space, critical infrastructure, in the banking space, like the use cases go on and on. And so I'm really grateful for the opportunity to just take a pause and have a conversation about how we can take control of our data, but not in terms of just kind of being compliant as an organization, but really seeing it as an opportunity to create trust and to empower people with how that data is used. What about you,
Mhm.
Jennifer? Why do you think it's so important?
And then just to echo everything that you said, we are very quick, I think, as a society or as individuals um, to take advantage of things that make our lives easier,
Yep.
right? And you mentioned the groceries and apps and the news aggregator
Hmm.
algorithms and our social media algorithms, and because you watched on your streaming platform, we think you would like, and all of those recommendations are coming out of you know tracking and utilizing the data that we are sharing, in order to target us with information that we think we would that the algorithms think we would like to see more of. And of course, we have to talk about AI. And any AI conversation is starts with a data conversation.
Yeah.
And so the benefits and incredible opportunity that we as individuals and we as organizations can recognize from AI, um, may at times be challenged by our data hygiene and how we are kind of controlling and managing our data. So lots of things to think about with the take control of your data topic for the week.
Yeah, you know what? I'm so glad that you pivoted to AI. So I mean, for everybody that's listening, I get the opportunity, day in and day out to speak to people like you, Jennifer, who have really spent a lot of intentional time understanding this, right? When I think of AI, I think of, it's easy for me to think about all the benefits. And I was sharing a story with you recently about, even just a local brewery, small business here in Moncton, New Brunswick, who used AI. They were able to go in, have AI create a recipe. They were able to have that same AI make the beer for them. And then they were able to say, hey, we need a name and we need a marketing, stamp to be able to put this out to market. And I thought, how cool is that, that this small business here in Moncton can use that and create a kind of a competitive edge. What I probably wasn't thinking enough about was whether that business or other organizations, how is AI, how is AI impacting the way privacy, our privacy in this landscape?
Hmm. Yeah, at least as you were kind of sharing the experience there, part of our conversation kind of led you to think about some things that weren't necessarily top of mind when you first encountered it, right? Um, and that's a fantastic example of a small business being able to kind of leap themselves forward with
Hmm.
the technology and capability that AI can offer, uh, and a really low use case, the low
Yeah,
risk use case, right?
yeah.
But then if we take a moment to think about other industries that are using data in their AI applications, whether it's something that they're building internally, training internally, or third party bringing in. Um, you know, making sure that the personal information and sensitive personal information is being treated appropriately, that consent has been obtained for the processing use case, and making sure that individuals have knowledge of how their data is being used and processed. So all things for organizations to think about in terms of their governance and policies as they are enabling AI in their business.
Yeah, awesome. I think let's stay on that for just a minute then. Let's talk about all of the ways. I mean, I think of regulation. I talk to a lot of business owners day in and day out, IT leaders, but not all of them are IT leaders. Some of them are leading marketing, some of them are leading finance. And when we talk about regulation, when we talk about these things, what's your advice for business owners, organizations to stay on top of regulation? Like I hear from customers, whether it's state by state, province by province, country by country, industry by industry, we are in no short of regulation. What's your
Mhm.
advice to people out there wanting to use regulation in a way that helps them, have proper privacy protocols in place? What's your advice for staying on top of all of that?
Uh, Great question. And when somebody knows the answer, tell me to improve it. Uh, there's there's a lot going on in the regulatory space, right? And there are a number of things that Optiv does. First of all, we try to help make things consumable and understandable. We have a number of resources that we've put together from we started in the privacy space and have a interactive map that folks can access, and I think we're going to bring that up here. Interactive map that folks can access and just take a look at the states, the U.S. states. Apologies, Kelsey. We started with the
No
United
problem.
States. Um, we'll get Canada in here as well, but to see what's in force, what is passed and enforcement is coming, and what states have legislation kind of moving through the rulemaking process. And this changes relatively frequently, and we update things quarterly. If you click into one of the states, it gives you a little summary of kind of the key things that businesses need to do in order to align and be compliant. It also summarizes the individual rights that folks have who are residents of those states in order to access control over their personal information. And we've have been working on things from an AI perspective as well. There's so much legislation um, coming. Some things that have already kind of worked through the process, especially internationally, but in the U.S. as well, to regulate data use and safe, secure, responsible AI. And so, kind of working on distilling some of that down and making it understandable and consumable for ourselves, let alone our clients and others who are interested. Going through those sorts of exercises for me are what kind of filters and internalizes. I talk about regulations every single day.
Hmm.
And I tell my clients, I don't I don't memorize these things, right? Like they're going to change, and I know where to find the information. So, to have an understanding of kind of what the floor of compliance is across the regulations that we need to that are in scope for us as an organization and for our clients, and help to guide toward um, a flexible, mature program that isn't going to be kind of thrown off kilter when the next regulation passes, right? I think we're kind of past that. There's, 20 states now that have uh, consumer, broad consumer protection legislation in place. And so, I don't think we're going to see anything that goes too far off of that one way or the other. But we do anticipate at some point that there may be federal legislation that comes in as well. So we've seen momentum at different points in time. We'll see what happens in the next in this administration, but that's also a thought in Canada as well. I don't have a map for Canada. We do have resources for Canada on our website, but with our neighbors to the north, there is federal legislation that may very well be um, significantly revised in the near future, given some of the rulemaking that is currently happening in Canada. And there's also provincial and territory specific legislation to keep track of there as well. Every province and territory has some level of protection. So there is a lot to keep track of and a lot that our clients are aware of from kind of that broad protection perspective, let alone the specific industry that they're in. You mentioned finance, you mentioned healthcare, and there are additional layers depending on the type of information that folks are handling. They need to keep in their minds as well.
Hmm. Yeah, awesome. When I think of regulation, help me out if I'm oversimplifying this. When I think of regulation, it's really there to give us a benchmark of how we can demonstrate to ourselves and to the market that we are doing the right things to ultimately create transparency and,
Mhm.
going back to taking control of your data, empowering ourselves as, the organization, or, individuals interacting with an organization, empowering us to take control of our data. I think it gives us the framework to do that. Would you agree with that?
Abs- I do. And, our customers and consumers, us as individuals, I mean, I'm sitting in a fairly educated with a fairly educated perspective as a privacy professional, but I think that we see in marketing of products that certain brands really emphasize the privacy aspects or the privacy forward aspects of their products, um, and the consumer, the target audience that we're being marketed to, is becoming more aware of the value of our information as individuals and the value of that information to the organizations that we share it with.
Hmm.
Um, And so in order to retain positive brand perspective, value, and build trust with consumers, organizations, first of all, you're required to provide a privacy notice when you are processing personal information.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, to describe what data it is, what you're doing with it and why, who you're sharing it with, and what individuals' rights are and how they can exercise those rights. And when you can provide that, whether many organizations at this point are providing consumer rights to individuals outside of states that or territories that legislate consumer rights, because it's a tough thing to say no, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't build consumer sentiment. And what does it cost the organization to lose one or a handful or a small percentage of individuals who choose to exercise those rights, or to versus the um, the the approach and the platform that you will honor folks' rights and enable them to kind of take control of their data should they choose.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Um, hmm. Thinking about individuals, thinking about organizations at large. What is just one kind of key takeaway, Jennifer, that you would have for people to, really do just that, take control of their data?
From an organizational perspective, it starts with educating your employees what personal data is and how to process it safely, um, and in accordance with your policies. From a then with a relationship perspective to individuals, getting those privacy notices, keeping them up to date, ensuring that they are reflective of the things, the activities that you're doing. If you are deploying AI and using data, personal information in AI, how are you doing that? And disclosing that as a responsible AI um, uh, objective, I guess. And then from a individual perspective, to take control, read those policies, read those notices, read the terms and conditions. I mean, I think we are, every single one of us listening, guilty of maybe kind of just checking the box, or downloading the thing or accessing the thing, and maybe not paying attention to to all the legal terms and notice that those notices entail. Um, and then perhaps being surprised when you see an ad for the thing that you were just browsing for or talking about,
Right.
or seeing it, seeing on the TV, and now you see it on your phone. And I don't know about you all, but I have a Samsung TV and I have a Samsung phone, right? So um, there are um, with those notices, those are there to educate individuals. There are settings, self-service tools that you can use as an individual, as a consumer, to be sure that you know what information you are sharing with the businesses that you are giving your information to, that you are purchasing things from, that you are uh, consuming services from, and being aware of what your opportunities are to take control of your data should you choose, to minimize targeted advertising, to minimize or opt out of automated decision making, and to be aware of where your data is going, if it's going into AI, large language models, or whatever it is. Um, Educating yourself is a kind of a key takeaway that I would encourage individuals, whether you are uh, on the consumer side of things, but also as an individual within your organization, to ensure that you know what your policies are and the path to help enforce those policies and be a data privacy champion for your company.
Yeah, cool. I mean, as I'm listening to you, the thing that stands out to me is just, it's a word that we used earlier in the conversation, but it sounds like do things intentionally, right?
Mhm.
When you're sharing data, do it in an intentional way. Um, Make sure that you know what you're sharing. Make sure you know why you're sharing it. And if you're an organization that is collecting data or asking people for data or storing data, make sure you're doing it in an intentional way. You know where it is, you know who has access to it, and you know how it's being leveraged for the business, or
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And when you are done with data, get rid of it. As an organization, let's say, we don't like to
This
say
is
the
a
B word,
thing. This is a
right?
thing, like,
It
right?
is.
Like, we can be hoarders of data.
Yes. And we don't like to say the B word in this industry, right? But should there be a breach, if you are holding on to data that you no longer need, it just exposes, it just expands the impact of
Mhm.
that unfortunate outcome, right? So employing good data hygiene in order to minimize not only immediate impact, but potentially, you know, downstream uh, it, unintentional and you know certainly outcomes that no one would wish for.
Yeah. Can we talk about that, because we did actually get a question in the chat, and I did want to just bring it forward, and I think this is timely. Organizations are collecting data, storing data, at an unprecedented rate. What is the advice to the business leader in, say, IT, who is responsible for the privacy of the organization? How do they help the greater organization get on board with everything they need to do as privacy, officers, if you will, to keep control of the data? What's something practical that they can do in their own organization to get everybody on board with this?
Yeah, I think that's a great kind of last question to kind of give us some actionable insights as we wrap things up here. As an organization, during Privacy Week, for beginning of the year, it's a great time to kind of evaluate policies, doing a sanity check and evaluation of the processing that you're doing and making sure that your records and policies reflect that. And then uh, making a plan for continued education within your organization, identifying those privacy champions that can, not just during Privacy Week, but throughout the year, and you know, kind of be your eyes and ears throughout the organization to say, oh, we're going to change this approach, we're going to do this new initiative. Let's make sure that we document, that we assess, that we do the things in order to ensure that we're staying in line with our policies and helping to protect data for our consumers, while still realizing the value and the reason that we're in business, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's kind of a great time for
absolutely.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. Creating, a culture within the organization of privacy,
Absolutely.
right?
Exactly.
Awesome.
So, Kelsey, thank you so much for joining me today
Hey,
for
my
this
pleasure.
conversation, taking control of your data. Thank you, everyone listening, for joining Optiv on today's LinkedIn Live conversation. Please connect with us at optiv.com to learn more about cybersecurity solutions that may fit your needs. And I hope you'll join me, Jennifer Mahoney, this afternoon at 1 o'clock Eastern. And I will be meeting with the National Cybersecurity Alliance to talk data in their session now here again during Privacy Week. So we'll be going over understanding and adjusting settings in applications you already use, and you will find the link to register on Optiv's LinkedIn profile. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks,
See you
everyone.
there, Jennifer.
Thanks, Kelsey.